Today is August 29th, 2024. This is episode 43 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over our power rankings for the 18 teams in the Big Ten. We'll also make our picks for each team's over-under in the wins department, and then we will wrap up with a preview of Week 1 and maybe even a half recap, Joe, because by the time we finish, there might be some Big Ten teams that are done with their Week 1 game, and then obviously a couple others tonight, tomorrow. So we'll get to it then. But, Joe, we have got our 18 teams. 18-1, we're going to go over why we have that specific team in the spot that we have. Don't need to spend too long on it because we did go through every team's schedule last week, but then after that, we will go to their win-loss total. So, Joe, why don't you take it away with the team that you've got in last place?
Sean, I'm going to go with one of the newcomers. It's going to be the UCLA Bruins.
Okay.
I just do not think they are well-adjusted as of right now. I think Ethan Garbers is fine enough, but with no line and no really skilled players to help support him, I do think they're in for a rough year with Coach Foster. So I'll pick them last, but not too much of a major concern considering the situation they were left in. Not much more else on top of that, Sean. I do think you got their over-unders pulled up.
Yeah, I have UCLA 16th, Joe, so not a whole lot better. They, across various sports books, no free ads, so various sports books, they are at 5. 5 wins on the year. You were going under?
I'm juicing the under there, Sean.
Okay, I will also be going the under. I just think that, life could be difficult for them, as we've made pretty clear in the past. Now, Joe, since UCLA's off the board, I will be going with the team that I have in last place, and that is Michigan State. Brand new roster, brand new coaching staff after Mel Tucker. Jonathan Smith comes over from Oregon State. Joe, before we get to the win-loss total, where do you got the Spartans?
I certainly don't have them in 18th, Sean. I have them more the middle ground, maybe at 14. But, Sean, that is actually a crazy take. That probably raised more eyebrows for the people listening after the fact than any other team. I'll be real honest with you.
Look, I do think the middle is very jam-packed, and you don't have to win a lot to get in there, but I can see them really struggling. And there are 4 teams really, who I definitely put at the bottom, maybe 5, but 7th through 13th, I mean, could be anywhere, but I think we'll be pretty. So you have them at 14th, Joe?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
right
so they're still in that bottom 5, but a little bit of. Now, they have got the same wins over-under as a team that you have in last, UCLA. Michigan State over-under 5 wins.
I might just go. I'm going to predict 5 wins on the dot, so I'm not going to say over/under. I just think they get a. Oh, why am I forgetting the phrase? But yeah, they get 5 wins even.
Okay, I'm going to go under. I can't pick them to come in last and then go over 5 wins. That might be hedging the bets a little bit there. But, Joe, 16 teams to go, so that leaves 17th open for you. Who you got there?
I actually got Purdue. I know, Ryan Walters is recruiting well, as we talked about in the previous episode. I know Hudson Card is back, but I just think with this schedule, and maybe, team by team, if we're going to be have all teams play each other in some simulation, which isn't possible. I don't think they would be this, just based on everything this year that they lost, losing Tyrone Tracy. They lost their edge, Nick Skirton. Lost pretty much half their defense. Not much else more to say, Sean. I think they're 17th, just slightly above UCLA.
I've also got them slightly above UCLA. That's 15th for me, Joe. They do have an incredibly tough schedule, but they might come in last, but they might not be the worst team. Now, there is no balanced schedule in this league, so we could see, just because you finished above another team doesn't necessarily mean you're better than them. So, Joe, Purdue comes in with the lowest win-loss total here. No surprise. 4.5. Do the Boilers get themselves 5 wins?
I'm gonna go slightly under. I think they get them 4. Nothing too catastrophic, but nothing that would make me bet the over here, Sean.
Yeah, I'm going to go under 2. 5 is a lot of wins. And if you think of, 5 and 7, I think that'd be an incredible season for them. It really would, with the amount of talent they have on the schedule. I'm going under 2. But, they still might. 4 wins might not be such a bad season for the Boilers where they're at right now. And that. So that leaves 17th open for me, Joe. And I've got Illinois here. Fighting Illini really, really back and forth over the years. I just think that they have not really done much to get themselves even into the middle of the pack. And curious to see where you've got the Fighting Illini.
Sean, I have them slightly below Michigan State, who I have at 14. I have the Fighting Illini at 15. I do like their offense a lot more. I think it's strange that their defensive line is not expected to be as good as it's been under Brett Bielema throughout his tenure here, which is kind of a staple of Brett Bielema teams, just good fundamental defense. So I don't love the sound of that. I don't hate their offense, but losing your identity as a head coach in terms of what you provide, especially for 2024 with this new format, I'm not a big fan. So I got the Illini at 15, Sean.
5.5 is their win total. Now, Joe, that might be a lot. They do get started tonight against Eastern Illinois, so they could put a little bit of a dent into that total. They do have Purdue. They do play a couple of the other teams at the bottom of the conference, but getting over this total is going to be very difficult. I'm gonna go under again.
Oh, Sean, sorry. Rutgers just scored a last-second touchdown for all the over-betters, like myself, over 50.5. Rutgers scored on the last play.
That's big.
So that's big for people like me. But
Howard didn't do you any favors there, did they? By putting up a touchdown.
No. Well, 44-7, Rutgers victory. So for all your Rutgers fans out there, you're officially the first Big Ten team to get a win. So congratulations, worth mentioning. Sean, sorry to interrupt you. What were you about to say?
5.5 Illinois. 5.5 wins.
Again, it's one of these that's, I think, really well placed by Vegas. I think they get 5 wins. I don't think there's anything too crazy about that line. And hell, even slightly above it's not too shocking either, Sean. But I'm gonna go under.
Illinois very well could be 3-0, and that's certainly I think they might have to be to have a chance of going over, because they do have a number of tough games here in the Big Ten. But, all right, Joe, I've got my Final Four teams chalked off. Do you have anybody in that, or not Final Four, bottom 4? Do you have anybody in that bottom 4 still that we haven't talked about? I think you still have second to last.
Yes. At 16, I do have Indiana, unfortunately. I do love Kurt Signetti. I do love the additions. I do like Curtis Rourke, the Ohio quarterback. I just think in terms of schedule and everything else, Sean, I do think they impress early. I had an Indiana fan at the office tell me they start off 7-0. There's no way in actuality he could believe that. But other than that, Sean, I do think they're 16th. I think they're on the right track, or they will be on the right track, but just not now.
Hey, let's start 1-0. How about that?
Yep.
And then 2-0. But, yeah, so Indiana I have at 14th, so that gets rid of my bottom 5. And, Joe, I think that is your bottom 5 as well, if I'm not mistaken. I do think that those are the 5 worst teams in the conference. Indiana, like you said, they do have a couple of high-profile transfers. Curtis Rourke, 1 year of eligibility left. So, he doesn't come in if he doesn't think that they could at least have a chance of a bowl game. And that's exactly what their line is at. Vegas has them at 5.5 wins. Now, this seemed a little high to me at first, but like you said, they do have a number of winnable games early on in the season. You have the first 7 games are all winnable. Now, they're not going to win them all, but if you're sitting at 5-2 there, 4-3, you're thinking that this has got a pretty good chance of going over. So I'm going to go for the homer pick here, my first over of the day. The Hoosiers get 6 wins.
You know what, Sean? Based on the non-conference and the favorable schedule, I think record-wise they might within the conference they might be bottom, but maybe 3 conference wins gets them there. I'll also ride the over. Why not?
They do play Florida International, Western Illinois, and Charlotte all at home. And the second and third game there sandwiches a road test at UCLA. So not completely out of the question to get pretty close to that line before we turn the calendars to October, Joe. Okay. Now, we have both have our bottom 5 teams gone. You've got you did the last one, you did Indiana, so I will do the team that I have in 13th place, and that is Northwestern. Huge surprise last year. Now, I did actually knock them down a couple spots because I saw their total by Vegas win total and the line in their first game this weekend. And they're playing Miami, Ohio, and they're a field goal. They're favorites by a field goal. And, I think last year, to say it was a fluke might be a little harsh. I don't think anybody expects them to get back to 8 wins, but I think middle of the conference would be a really good season for them, and that's where I have them finishing in 13th.
Sean, I have them slightly higher. I actually had them at 11, so toward probably just right at the the tipping point of the middle class. I like Bryce Kurtz. I like AJ Henning. I do like Mike Wright, the guy they got from Mississippi State. And David Braun, I know it's been a limited track record, Sean. One year he's proven me massively wrong. So fool me once, fool me twice. You know how the saying goes. I'm gonna have pick Northwestern at 11, and if they do go above that shot, I wouldn't be that surprised based on everything David Braun showed me in less than a year.
Now their Vegas line for wins, Joe, is just 4.5. Now they do have a tough game at home against Duke, but they do have Eastern Illinois and Miami, Ohio as their other non-conference games. They do play 3 ranked teams as of now. They have Illinois, who is expected to finish near the bottom, Indiana, who's expected to finish near the bottom at home. But a tougher schedule for the Wildcats, but their total's just at 4.5. So what do you got for them there?
I got over. I do think they have a very plausible chance to return to a bowl game, and I'm even going to include the bailout here, where if they do the 5-7 academic eligibility, as we all know, Northwestern's a very fine academic institution. So I don't think that much changes from Pat Fitzgerald to David Braun. So give me the over there.
Yeah, I'm going to have to lean over too. At some places it was at 5 even, which is probably about where I have them. So that could have been a push there, but I think they do get 5 wins, and whether that gets them into a bowl game or not, that still will be at least another solid season for them. All right, Joe, you've still got your 13th team on the board, if I'm not mistaken, so give it to us.
I think this is why Week 2 is very intriguing for the entire conference. I have Maryland at 13, and I say that because I have Michigan State right below them at 14. I like Mike Loxley. I like their play calling. I do think the addition of MJ Morris is interesting. From everything I'm reading and everything I'm hearing, no one really knows what kind of team this is going to be. You can give Mike Loxley the benefit of the doubt that his offense will be competent. Unfortunately, September Maryland is a thing, Sean. So until it's not, you're just gonna have to ride with that based on the 6-year tenure of Mike Loxley. I do think they believe in this defense a lot more than they have in the past. At least that's what they've been touting publicly. So I'll give them a slight benefit of the doubt, which is why I put them at 13. So not necessarily the bottom of the conference, but teetering toward that, as I think the offense has a limited ceiling, especially after Talia leaves.
I've got one spot higher, Joe, in 12th. So that leaves your 12th open. But I agree, Maryland, they do have to do their work early if they are going to finish in the bowl game, top of the conference. They do have to win some games early. Like you said, that Michigan State game, they have 3 non-conference games, all winnable at Virginia, and then they host Villanova and UConn, and then they go to Indiana and host Maryland, or they are Maryland. They host Northwestern, so you could get to 6 wins in the first 6 games if this Maryland team is serious about taking a step in the right direction before things do get very difficult down the stretch. Now, they might go 6-6. They might win 6 and they might lose 6, but it seems like we're pretty locked in on where we have them right now. I've got them at 12th. You've got them at 13th. Now, Joe, their line is a little high in my opinion. It's at 6.5. That they do host Rutgers late in the year. I think they get 6 wins. I think it's under.
I do think it's slightly under, Sean. I'm just going to list off 6 losses very quickly. I think one of Virginia, Michigan State could be a toss-up. Then you definitely got USC, Oregon, Iowa, at Penn State. That's 5. And then including another, which could include at Indiana or an at Minnesota. I do think they get a 6 loss somewhere in those few games I just listed off.
So we are both on the under. Joe, that was your 13th place team. I've got here this team at 11th that you just mentioned. I'm guessing they're in your 12th spot, and that is PJ Fleck's Minnesota Golden Gophers. They're in action now, actually, and now this might put their game right now against North Carolina might make the over-under question and where they'll finish a whole lot easier. Now, it's not a Big Ten game, but still, this is they just punted. This game was, UNC -1 on the road. It's about as toss-up as it gets. But I have them finishing here in 11th, just another middle-of-the-road season from the Gophers.
Sean, you're exactly right. I have them in 12th. I think establishing themselves as a middle-class program early on in this new regime, in this new alignment, and I'm going to have to pick a new phrase for that because I've created 6 different ones across this podcast. I think that's completely fine. I think how Max Brosberg turns out ultimately influences this over-under. I do think the running game is there. I think the defense will have to adjust, losing Joe Rossi to Michigan State. But, Sean, I do think Minnesota does their typical thing. I think they play hard, and perhaps they pull off another upset, as they've done sometimes in the past. Not as often as in Iowa or the Spoilermakers, but I could give them the benefit of the doubt there.
Their line, Joe, 5.5.
5.5. Man, I really wish we did this after this UNC game. I'm going to go over very non-confidently, and I'm going to say that whether it's tonight or whether it's later on, they do have to pull an upset to accomplish this.
I do think it's 5 if you're not including today's game, and, loss tonight gets them under and win puts them over. So I'm going to go over. Joe, did you say over?
I said over, yes.
Okay,
non-confidently with the understanding they have to pull off one probably decently big upset.
Yeah, I think if they win tonight, they'll be in good position to get 6, and if they lose, then they're not in great position, to be honest. So, Joe, that leaves 10 left, and I believe it's 1 through 10 for both of us, if I'm not mistaken. So,
yep.
Give us your 10th place team.
I'm going to go with Nebraska. I think Dylan Raiola is a generational talent, and we're seeing eye to eye there, too. Ultimately, Sean, I like the defense. I like what they bring back on the interior D-line in particular. I do think it is not up there with Michigan's, but it's, probably a few steps below, which is a real compliment. It's nothing to even, think I'm throwing shade at. The schedule is very favorable for Nebraska. However, I do think if they lose an early impact game, whether it's to Colorado, whether it's any game before they go to Columbus, Sean, I think is a game that their fan base, whether fairly or unfairly, is going to expect them to win. I do think expecting them to go, I believe, 7-0 prior to what's probably going to be a bludgeoning in Columbus, Ohio, might be a little unfair with a freshman QB, and particularly, a tough road game against Purdue or in Indiana. But, Sean, I do think they're going to struggle a bit just with growing pains with Raiola. Some people expect 9-3. I do expect probably a little under, like an 8-4, 7-5.
Well, Joe, that's their line, 7.5. Now, I think they're probably 1 year away, or they might even be 1 year away from being 1 year away, if we're honest. But I think we're both in lockstep that this is definitely not their highest potential send the house type of year, but still favorable schedule, as you said, puts their line at 7.5. So you said you could see an 8-4, 7-5. Well, that's right where the line is. So give us an over/under for the Cornhuskers.
I'm going to go under, and I do think if you're going to make me pick 5 losses, Sean, I'm just going to go one of Colorado or Purdue, Ohio State, USC, Wisconsin, and Iowa. I think Nebraska stumbles a little at the end after a pretty light appetizer.
Joe, I'm going to go over. This is the first one that we totally disagree with. You had the push for Michigan State. I had the under. I do think they'll get that Wisconsin win. But, man, that Colorado game is important for their win-loss total. And then, the 2 road games that they play in the Big Ten before Ohio State are important. There's definitely multiple chances for Nebraska to get 8. And I think they'll get at least one of them. Now, Colorado is losing to North Dakota State right now, so that might be a must. That might be a must win for the Cornhuskers off the bat, if we're being honest. Especially for win-loss total, they're already favored by 6.5. It will be at home, so Cornhuskers get that. They'll be on their way to a good season. Now, the team that we got a 9th, Joe just mentioned, Wisconsin Badgers. Very, very up and down season last year. It didn't really seem like anybody wanted to win that Big Ten West. You got an Alabama on the schedule. You got a tough schedule for the Badgers this year. Might be the toughest in the league. But I've got them in 9th.
Sean, I have a slight disagreement. I do have Washington here. I think, based on Wisconsin, and Wisconsin I have at 8, so it's no big discrepancy.
Yeah, I've got Washington at 8. So,
yeah. I think Ches Belusi back helps. I think Tyler Van Dyke is an upgraded quarterback from their situation or whatever that was last year. I do think inevitably they're going to have to find and recruit their own, which has been something I think Luke Fickell's not going to really shy away from either. I just think the first 2 years he's going to have to use these library QBs, as some people will call them. I think they have a lot of weakness at the defensive line, and that's not a great thing for Wisconsin, especially based on the schedule they're going to play. Sean, want to walk us through over-under real quick?
So Wisconsin is at 7. Now, they do have that tough Alabama game in the non-conference. It is at home, but Alabama's still 9.5-point favorites as of now. And 7-5 doesn't seem totally out of the question. I'm going to go under just because I think it'll be really tough for them to get to 8. So I think a push or under is most likely, but I'll go under.
Yeah, Sean, I'm going to go push, and thank you for reminding me of the phrase from earlier. I'm going to go 7 right at the dot. I think it's Bama, USC, Northwestern, Penn State, Iowa, Oregon. Those are 6 potential losses right there. I think they pick one of those off, but I don't think they get a 33% clip rate on those games that they're likely going to lose.
All right, so Washington, Joe, the team that you have in 9th, I have in 8th. Newcomers to the Big Ten, the national runners-up from a year ago. They do start their year on Saturday against Weber State, Eastern Michigan, and they host Wazoo in the non-conference. And then they start off Big Ten play with Northwestern and Rutgers. So Northwestern at home, like to think Washington does get to 4-0. There is a significant drop-off from that team last year for sure. Michael Penix is in the NFL. Rome Odunze is in the NFL. But at least enough talent, enough talent to get to the middle of the pack here. I think we both agree with that. Their win total is just a tick below Wisconsin at 6.5. So Washington, do you think they get to 7, or do you think they get stuck in the mud at 6-6?
I'm glad it's 6.5 and not 7 because I might have been inclined to answer push. I think they get the over on 6.5 shot. I think the early part of their schedule is really helpful, but it's kind of like Nebraska, losing one of those, and that over-under becomes really difficult.
Yeah, I'm going through it right now. There's a number of games they could lose, but they're also talented enough to beat some of these top teams at home, whether that's a USC or Michigan. They do have Rutgers away. They do have Iowa away, Indiana away, Penn State away. But they do host, UCLA. This could be one of a be 5-1 and finish the year 7-5 type of seasons because their end of their schedule is difficult. So I'm gonna go over too, but I think it must come with doing your work early. All right, Joe, we've got the top 7 left. At 7, I have the team that is 1-0, and that's Rutgers. Pretty high expectations for the Scarlet Knights this year. Some, as you alluded to last week, signaling they might be able to sneak their way into the playoff. No, I don't know about that. But they started 1-0 after a tough first half today against Howard. But they get the job done. They end up, winning rather handily. Athen Kaliakmanis looks pretty good in the first game for the Scarlet Knights. But where do you have Rutgers?
Sean, I have Rutgers slightly above that at 6. I'll tell you my 7th in a second. I really like how they looked tonight, and frankly, it might be unfair that we started this right after the first 3 quarters of the game because I think Athen Kaliakmanis, God forbid, I don't know what Gavin Wimsatt nor any prior quarterback at Rutgers in the Schiano era did to that Big Ten announcer. I don't know why. Like every other play, Athen Kaliakmanis completed a pretty routine pass. He goes, "That's what they were missing last year. That was their problem." I think that's pretty ridiculous, but definitely an upgrade. I like how he looks at this system. I like Kirk Shiraka's synergy with him. I think Kirk Shiraka, given time, is one of the more effective coordinators we've seen in this conference since 2018. So I really like him. I do think Rutgers can make a push for Indy. I think a push for the playoff is a little, I think that's getting a little ahead of ourselves, especially right now. But with Manungai staying healthy and Kaliakmanis, a good Schiano defense, it's definitely possible, Sean, that they contend for Indy.
They are at the same place as Washington, Joe, at 6.5 wins. Over under, what you got?
I'm going to go over, Sean, and I'll even be inclined to say I think they get to 8 wins. I think it's been a steady build. And maybe it's not been reflected in the first, year 2, year 3. I know there's a little drop off, but year 3 to 4, it's kind of been like the middle of Schiano's tenure in the early 2000s when Rutgers started to go from that's like the joke of the Big East to a team that was contending for that conference every year.
Yeah, Joe, I've had the same exact thing written down. And for the viewers, we did not talk about any of these before. I did have over, and then I wrote 7.5 if you want better odds. So I definitely see a path to 8 wins. It probably does come with one victory or one game that they're not going to be favored in, whether that's, Nebraska or, but they've a couple of these road games against teams in and around the middle of the pack. But, Joe, they've got only one game against a ranked opponent, and that is at USC on Friday night, as we alluded to last week. But, Joe, if there's a chance where if they're a pretty good team, that they become ranked and they win a lot of football games this year because, they have a bunch of games against the middle of the pack. If they're better than the middle of the pack, they should win most of these. So I definitely see a way to 8. I think 9 might be a little much. A lot is going to have to go their way, but certainly 7 and 8 is very possible this year. All right, Joe, you've got Rutgers at 6th, so who you got in 7th then?
I got the USC Trojans, another one of our newcomers, so we got 3 of the 4 so far. I don't think where we rank Oregon is going to shock way too many people. I think USC, there's been 2 narratives all offseason. The extreme Lincoln Riley haters, particularly on ESPN, which is pretty interesting considering they don't cover the Big Ten anymore. Wink, wink. Says he's a fraud and that he can't coach. I don't know why that's such a popular thing. I think the guy had one bad year and at a team that he's still relatively rebuilding, and he's all of a sudden pathetic. I think that's a joke. I think Miller Moss is really good. I like Zachariah Branch is still there. So USC didn't forget how to play offense. Let's make that very clear. And with the change from Alex Grinch to DeAnton Lynn from UCLA, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they figured this out. You're going to be thrown into the fire right away. 2 of your first 4 games, LSU and then at Michigan. That's going to be pretty rough. But, Sean, if they win one of those games, I think the narrative on USC is really, really different.
And Joe, that game against LSU is neutral in Vegas, so you'd like to think they do travel well there. If they have really any hope of being a good team, I think their fans are going to have to travel there and see it. LSU 4.5-point favorites now, so certainly that game will be close. That is Sunday night at 7:30 on ABC, so that'll pretty much be a standalone game. To a ranked versus ranked battle. That's a big one, like you said. They have a ton of tough games. They go to Minnesota in October. They go to Maryland. They go to Washington. They do have the ranked LSU, ranked Notre Dame at the end of the year too. So, the questions will be answered rather quickly, I think, like you said. And if they're sitting at hosting Wisconsin at 1-2. Well, maybe post-Caleb Williams era, it's not going exactly how they thought, but you get Penn State at home. You have a ton of opportunities, a ton of teams that we haven't even said yet, top of the conference, and then, like you said, the two non-conference games that are high profile. So I've got them in 6th, so it looks like we've got them and Rutgers flipped. Their win total at 7.5.
I'm going to go over Sean. I think even if they lose their first 2 of the first 4 games, you look at the schedule, the only game that really sticks out to you, there's 2. It's Penn State and Notre Dame. Luckily, both of those are at home. USC, they do go to Washington, too. That's going to be tough. But like we said earlier, and it was you who made the point, Sean, so I'm not going to take any credit, they don't play a true Big Ten game.
Other than
Oregon
Minnesota.
does. Yeah, but even then.
It's October 5th. It's not November 20th.
Yeah, so I'm going to be inclined. I think, like I've said, I've stressed the middle ground for USC, the middle of the extremes of Lincoln's a fraud versus Lincoln's still an elite coach. I still think he is an elite coach. So I think they get to 8 wins, and I bet they pull off one of those. Notre Dame or Penn State, I bet they pull one of those upsets off.
No, Joe, I think they do start the year at 23. I think they'll probably, hop in, hop out of the rankings. I have them under 8 wins, but I still think a 7-5 USC team is probably a top 25 team, especially if they put up good efforts in losses to these really, really good teams. It might be a tough. They're definitely going to be better than their record, whatever it is. Even if they're 9-3, that means they played and beat some really good ball clubs. So I'm going to go under, but I do think they're still a pretty good team that'll finish definitely in the top half of this conference. All right, Joe, we got 5 teams left. It is the same 5 teams. At 5th, I have got the team that somehow found a way to the Big Ten championship game last year despite not knowing that you could score points, and that's Iowa. Cade McNamara's back from injury. You have a new offensive coordinator in there. You start the year ranked 25th. Joe, what are your thoughts on the Hawkeyes?
I think Iowa is my 4th team, so slightly above. I think the teams, now personnel-wise, I don't think it's that improved based on, losing a Cooper DeJean last year. You lose Eric All. I know he didn't play all that much.
He was good when he played, though.
He was good when he played. And, he was key at winning those early games. And those early games last year is what ultimately decided the West, which is kind of amazing considering, it was actually funny, Sean. In late October, it was nearly concluded that Iowa was going to win the West had they not screwed up a huge game, even after that Minnesota debacle they had. I think Tim Lester from Western Michigan, he's going to make the offense salvageable. I think the Cade McNamara 7 of 21 is going to get a little. I think right now it's just getting old. It was 2 weeks ago. I do think a potential loss to Iowa State is more than possible, but based on this light conference schedule, Sean, and I think the defense is going to gain even more confidence, and same with the offense based on the competition. Unless something disastrous, I mean terrible injury or maybe they get 87-0 in Columbus, I do think they have a real chance at Indy. So I'm going to put them at 4, and the offense will be improved.
Hey, you see that Ohio State game, Joe, they're probably going to be favored in every other game, at least as of now, unless they look awful and lose a couple. The tough games on the schedule that you look at are Maryland on the road, Nebraska at home, Washington at home, Minnesota on the road. I mean, maybe the Gophers will be favored by a point, if Iowa looked bad early on, but um, you know they're going to be favored in 10 or 11 games here, and that is big. Um, so I tend to agree. I think they will probably finish higher than fifth. I just think they'll actually be the fifth best team. And Joe, Vegas agrees that they're going to win a lot of games. Their line is at 8.5. I think the Hawkeyes get to 9.
On some sports books, 7.5, which I hope you took that in May because 8.5 might make a few people hesitant. I'm gonna go over. I think Iowa. That's traditionally been, and I think it's been studied that that's been like a 60 or 70% success rate over the last 10 years. Iowa over win totals. So I'm gonna be the conservative gambler and say they go over on that.
Yeah, I think so too. This is another one where if you want to get some better odds, I think you can probably go 9.5 too. You're going to want to pull your hair out. You're going to hate watching football on Saturdays, but at the end of the day, I don't know if it could have looked worse than it did last year, and they still won a lot of football games. So I think it'll look better. I think they might not be better, but it'll certainly look better. And these first couple games are big. You gotta blow some of these teams out and save your energy for the tough part of the year. And if they get into a dogfight with either Troy or Illinois State, it might not be a great sign they are favorites over the Cyclones in Game 2 by a field goal so far. But, Joe, I've got them over, too, and if you want to go another one, I would be against that. Top 4. No, you've got Iowa 4th, so who you got 5th?
I got Penn State. I still think they're a really damn good team, Sean. And when I say they're not elite, in no means should that ever be interpreted as an insult to anyone, whether it's James Franklin, Drew Aller, Andy Kotelnicki, Tom Allen, doesn't matter. I think Penn State, people will look at Michigan's schedule, they'll look at Oregon's schedule, they'll certainly look at USC's schedule, and they'll harp on how hard it is, and they're not wrong. Penn State is a sneaky hard schedule, Sean, and I think their season at certain points has the potential to go off the rails, not in terms of complete disaster like 7-5-esque, but where they go from a 12-team playoff lock to a team that's just fighting for their lives to even be in the conversation.
Yeah. Now, Joe, I agree with you where I don't think they're elite. I think they're a very good team, but you can be very good and make the college football playoff now. You can be 8-10-2 with 2 losses to teams that were way better than you and still, get your name called. So I think they do have a little bit of a limited ceiling. I've got them 4th. I do think they end up in the college football playoff. Now, week 1, they do go to West Virginia. They are favorites by 8 points. That would be big for them to drop that. That would really put their season off to a tough start. But Drew Aller looked very solid against the Mountaineers last year when that was the opener last year as well. So I think they get this one, and then they're on their way to a 1, maybe 2 loss season. But other than that Ohio State game, Joe, they should compete in the rest of them. They are favorites when they go to California to play the Trojans as of now. So I think certainly 11-1 is on the cards for the Nittany Lions, and that will certainly be enough to get them to the college football playoff. But, Joe, their line's at 9.5, so do you think they'll get – I think this is more so will they get into the playoff, yes or no also? Because if they get 10 or 11 wins, chances are they'll be in.
I'm going to go no, Sean. I think Ohio State's one of those. I think people overlook the Wisconsin because they don't believe in Wisconsin, but I guarantee you that game will not be a noon game. I think that'll be a 3:30, and worst case for Penn State, that's a night game on Halloween weekend in Madison. I don't need to tell any traditional Big Ten fan, nor would any Pac-12 convert come over and tell me why that game could be a big problem. And then that's 2 right there at USC. And Sean, we'll talk about this after. I don't think they're out of the water completely this weekend. I'm not Pat McAfee. I think West Virginia presents some very unique challenges that Penn State struggled to address in the past, and that's game 1, so who knows?
Especially as a first game.
Yeah.
Sharpness down, fitness down. A couple of plays don't get your way. West Virginia returns a punt. Weirder things have happened. That they're certainly West Virginia is only plus 260 to win the ball game. So It's big noon kickoff there in Morgantown, and the stars might align for a Penn State dud in Week 1, because they are the only team going on the road in Week 1 in the Big Ten. Joe, if I'm not mistaken, USC's going to the neutral game, but so that could be difficult there for the Nittany Lions. Now, you're going under. I'm going to go over. I do think they get their season off started with a win. Can see a loss, but after that, it's all systems go. That 3-game stretch of USC on the road, Wisconsin on the road, and Ohio State is at home. I do think they need one of those if they're going to get to the college football playoff, especially if Wisconsin and USC turn out to be really good football teams. Then certainly you'd love one of those, but I don't think a 3-loss team gets in. Now we've got 3 left, Joe. These 3 teams all have their eyes set on a Big Ten, maybe not even just a Big Ten championship, but a national championship. I'm in third place. I've got the defending national champions, your Michigan Wolverines. New coach, new quarterback, new running back. Still a lot of pros on this roster, though, and they start off with a top 10 ranking and sights set on another national title.
Sean, I completely agree. I think overall, just to get bigger picture, a long-term narrative across a lot of coaching staffs, particularly in Ann Arbor and even Columbus, from some of our sources there. We have someone on the team down there. We're not going to name names, but we'll just say who it is. We'll just say these come from very sharp minds. I think the narrative is, whether it's Oregon, Ohio State, or Michigan, 1 through 3, that there's a drop-off from 1 to 3, 4 to 6. And I think certainly you've seen that in our rankings, and you're seeing that in a lot of power rankings throughout. Maybe some people have Penn State at 3 above Michigan. But overall, Sean, these are conceived as the top 3 teams. And consistently, Michigan's number 3. I think it's interesting that today it's been silently reported, because it's not broken like any crazy news, that Davis Warren might be the starter. Certainly a completely different quarterback than Alex Orji. Maybe more of a Cade with a higher ceiling. Word is he reads the passing game better. He's more trusted to run the offense smoothly. I think Alex Orji might be more of a cowboy, not just because he's from Texas, but in terms of how reckless he might be throwing. So I think how those 2 QBs are managed and what their ceilings ultimately become is what's going to separate the number 3 team, the third best team in the Big Ten, from being the first best team. So I think third is the appropriate place, Sean.
When you talk about their quarterback situation, Joe, they're one of the few teams in this conference that have a huge non-conference game. So, do you expect a 2-quarterback system against Fresno, or are they keeping their cards close to the chest and how they're going to deal with the Longhorns?
I think they play 2 QBs, and I don't think Texas is going to be a big fan of that. I don't think they're going to love having to cut up film for both Warren and Orji just for one game.
Orji did come in a few times per game last year.
A few like specialty packages.
But it wasn't it wasn't like he's going to see more action this year for sure, even if he's not the starter, right?
Yeah, truthfully, people laugh at this. I think the Leak Tebow analogy is a pretty good one from 2006. But an even more modern one, Sean, Alex Orji last year was what Tate Martell was to 2018 Ohio State, occasional packages. Now, Orji was a lot more successful, and I really hope his career trajectory isn't Tate Martell's playing-wise. But, Sean, I don't think anyone really knows what to expect from this. The Michigan insiders will prop them up all they want. That's what they're paid to do. This is a story that, again, it's going to determine whether Michigan's a top 12 team or a top 5 team even. If their quarterbacks are that good, there's no reason why they can't compete to go back-to-back.
So, Joe, they do have a tough schedule. The Texas game, as we said, they play USC, they play Oregon, they play Ohio State. 4 tough games. We talked about it last week. You probably need 2 of them to make the playoff. Vegas has got them at 9 wins. 3 losses might not be enough to get them into the playoff. But I think 2, especially if it's to 2 of those 4 teams, will. So what do you got? Win-loss over under 9.
To be very clear, they were 9.5 very early on in the offseason, which a lot of people found shocking. and it was juiced to the under. So a lot of people took that, which is why we're at 9. Some have them 8.5. I do think 9 is probably the conservative total that gets it correct. Uh, I think Oregon, Ohio State, Texas. Those are the 3 games they're favored to lose. Even if they win one of those, at Washington could be tough, and USC at home certainly not going to be a gimme based on what we see on Sunday. So I'm going to go 9, Sean. I'm just going to hit the push, and I really hope I'm wrong for the over.
Yeah, I think this Texas game is truly huge because if you win that, you could see them being undefeated when they host Oregon in November, and they're the Longhorns are going to be going into the Big House as favorites by a field goal. Now, I don't think any team other than maybe the Buckeyes have gone in there as favorites in a while. And week 2, that'll be also the noon kickoff, which is a little bit unfortunate because I'm probably not going to be able to watch it, but I'm certainly going to be locked into the score throughout the day. I think they win that, and I think they get to 10 wins and get into the playoff. And what a weight would be, such a weight would be lifted off the Wolverine shoulders if they do beat Texas, because then you have a number of, landmines that you probably can lose a game that you're not supposed to if you do get Texas. So I have them over. I think they'll get to 10. And then, after that, this really could be a springboard or sort of all right, 8-4, 9-3 season. You miss out on the playoff. You take a step back. All right, Joe, that leaves 2 teams for us at the top of the Big Ten. That is the 2nd-ranked Ohio State Buckeyes and the 3rd-ranked Oregon Ducks. Who have you got first and why?
I'm going to go Oregon 2nd, and it's really tough, Sean, because I think Oregon is currently favored over Ohio State. Not that it matters on August 29th what's going to happen on October 12th. Why I say that, I go position by position. It's really even if you want to break it down. Where Ohio State is a clear distinction is at running back between Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. I do think Jordan James is good. He was a really good number 2 back last year. He has to prove to me he's a good number 1 back. I think he will be. But I have 2 guys that have proven they're elite running backs in Henderson and Judkins. Now, people could say Gabriel is infinitely better than Howard. You can make that argument to me, but based on the weapons Ohio State has, especially if Jeremiah Smith is this alien freak that I believe he can be, oh boy. So, Oregon's number 2, and I criticize that. I'm not criticizing much about this team at all, Sean. They're an excellent team. They have the makings to win a national title. I just think Ohio State has experience more where it matters, particularly in the context of the Big Ten.
I have Oregon first and Ohio State second.
Okay.
I do think that Oregon, I don't think they're going to lose. Excluding the Michigan game for both of these teams, I don't see either one of them losing more than 2 games. And that, certainly will get them in, both of them into the college football playoff. I think we're really splitting hairs, but I think Oregon probably wins that game because they're the home team. And whether they're the better team or not, we've seen home teams that are not as good as the away team win games. But I think they're playing Ohio State at home, so they're probably going to beat them, and that's what split the tie for me. But very close, as you said, across the board. They do host the Buckeyes. They do go to the Big House. But then after that show, you have away to Wisconsin, away to Purdue, away to UCLA. That shouldn't really shock them. So, hopefully they take care of business in their other games where they can't afford a loss to whether it's the Buckeyes or the Wolverines and get into the playoff at 11-1 at the worst. So, Joe, both of these teams at 10.5. I think Ohio State goes under, and I think Oregon goes over.
Yeah, Sean, it really depends on that. It really depends on that game on October 12th, because then, one team can't lose outside of. I'm gonna go the direct opposite, Sean. I'm not even gonna bother explaining. I think Oregon goes 10-2. I think, God, I hate to make this prediction right now based on nothing. I think Ohio State gets them. I think they get them on October 12th, and that Oregon loses a game, whether it's at Michigan or at Wisconsin, maybe one of those. again, outside the Oregon and Michigan game, the only game Ohio State has any danger of losing is at Penn State, which since 2016, which was fluky in nature anyway. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole. Ohio State's not had much trouble there, Sean. So I think Ohio State gets at least 11 and Oregon gets 10.
Okay, so it very well, if you've got on the over or the under for both these teams, this probably comes down to that game. And if it doesn't, well, then that's because they're both really good teams and probably headed towards the college football playoff anyway. So, Joe, that's our over-unders and our power rankings. Really, really close. I don't think Michigan State was 4 different, but I don't think any others were more than 2, which is pretty impressive. That should make the tabulating for the average pretty easy because a lot of them might be tied. But that's our preview. Joe, one last question before we wrap it up today. What time would you put that Oregon-Ohio State game at?
Allegedly, it's going to be at 7:30 based on a leak from someone. I think
is that NBC then? 7:30?
Yeah, NBC. Yeah, I think that's about right. 7:30. I think Red River is also that day, so to put that at noon to compete with that would be a travesty. Some people might say that, oh, that's a great middle finger to the SEC. That's really a terrible way to politicize college football that I'm not about at all. So 7:30, I think the entire nation deserves to watch this game in some semblance of prime time.
So Red River is 3:30.
3:30. Oh,
so
I misspoke.
So I would think that Big Ten's probably leaning 7:30 over noon. There are a ton of other good games that day too, so it's not as if Big Noon is going to be some terrible game. You have Florida, Tennessee, Kansas State, Colorado, Penn State, USC, Ole Miss, LSU. Ole Miss, LSU is a 6 or 8 o'clock start, so that's a night game. So you would be competing against that. Mississippi State, Georgia is 3:30 or 6. So one of the two Big Ten games is going to be Big Noon. The other one's going to be 7:30. And USC is the home team in that Penn State game. So would they be Big Noon at 9 a.m. local time? Probably not. So, Joe, they might not have a choice. They might have to put this game at noon.
But that would be like 11 or 10 Oregon time, Sean. That's crazy.
Yeah. They have – I don't know if they've ever started games at 9 local time, but there's definitely been some mountain time zone games that have started
Colorado
at 10.
last year immediately comes to mind.
That had started at 10 a.m. So maybe, Big Noon gets pushed to Big 1, and you can get 1 o'clock local time in Columbus, but that is a nightmare. Whoever has to make that decision, good luck.
Well, this is where the TV execs make their big money, so we'll leave that up to them.
You've got the Tide at noon against South Carolina. You don't really want to be competing against them. So good luck to them. That'll be something to look out for as we get closer to that date, and you try to schedule your day around some of these games because it is that good of a day. It really is. So be on the lookout for that. Obviously, a lot of Big Ten teams in action this weekend. We'll be back early next week to recap the action and hopefully a lot of wins for the Big Ten. So thank you, everybody, for